Compliance to the intentional adulteration final rule has been in effect for more than 5 years for most businesses regulated by the FDA. But over the last several months, we've seen some new FDA action on the rule. I'm Lisa Lupo, the host of Tag Talks Food Safety, and today I'm welcoming Tag Director of Food Safety, Christopher Snabes, who has been recognized as a top 10 intentional adulteration vulnerability assessment instructor based on the number of persons he has trained and who have completed the course and received certification. Welcome, Chris.
Hi, Lisa, thank you for inviting me today.
We are so interested to gain all your knowledge on the intentional adulteration rule and everything that's been going with it. So happy to have you here.
Thank you.
So,
Me too.
You are quite the expert in intentional adulteration or IA rule. So we'll be talking about the recent actions that FDA has been taking on the rule. But before we go down that road, let's give some background. So can you provide our audience with a brief overview of the IA rule, what it is, who's subject to it, all that good stuff?
Okay, I'll do my best.
Okay.
Intentional, so a couple of definitions and what it all means and what do you have to do? What is all that in a nutshell? Intentional adulteration is the deliberate contamination of a food with either a biological, chemical, or radiological or physical agent by an individual or a group of individuals, which includes terrorists, with the intent to cause wide-scale public health harm. We're talking about preventing many people from getting ill or dying from eating the food or drink that you're manufacturing. Think of thousands of people. We're not talking about individual product tampering. That's a different rule. We're talking about intentional adulteration rule. So what does that mean? This mass casualty event, if it were to occur, could be conducted by somebody who has legitimate access to your facility, an inside attacker. It could be a contractor, a worker, a visitor, or service provider. And once they're in the facility, we have to assume a few things. We have to assume they know how to make the food that you're making, and they know where your most significant vulnerabilities are at. Okay. The rule applies to large FDA-regulated companies only. And those are companies that are manufacture, process, pack, or hold food for consumption. If you're a large company, you're obligated to have a written food defense plan. How do you do that? The first thing you have to do is you have to conduct one of three types of what we call a vulnerability assessment. And this helps you identify your most vulnerable or significant vulnerable points, which are either a step, point, or process within the manufacturing of your food or drink. This helps you identify which areas you have to do something about. So if you identify a significant vulnerability, we call that an actionable process step, or APS for short. Once you identify the actual process step, then all the rest of the rule kicks in. For each actual process step you identify, you have to create and implement a mitigation strategy. And that's something you do to prevent or reduce the likelihood of that inside attacker from successfully contaminating the food. Okay. What the agency has determined is that it doesn't matter what kind of food you make or drink you make. Okay, there's not one more food or drink that's more vulnerable than another. It's how it's manufactured is where the significant vulnerabilities lie. Once you've identified the APS, the actual process step, and you identified a mitigation strategy and you implemented the mitigation strategy, you're not done. You then have to write and implement how are you going to monitor that actual process step? How are you going to verify that is being done? And what is your corrective action going to be if it were to fail in the future? We call these the management components. Now, how do you do all that? How do you determine what a vulnerability is, or how do you determine what a mitigation strategy is best for you? Or how do you determine and what is the good verification procedure. You should take training. So there's trainings in all aspects of the food defense rule. It can be a food defense qualified individual on assessments, on mitigation strategies, and the management components, which includes writing the food defense plan as a whole. In simple terms, if you're a large facility, you need a written food defense plan to implement and to prevent a bad person from trying to kill a large number of people with the food or drink you make. Any employee and their immediate supervisor must be trained who works that actual process step. They must be trained in food defense awareness and how to implement the mitigation strategy at that actual process step. This rule is for all FDA regulated foods that go beyond what we normally consider under the preventive controls rule for FSMA. It includes seafood HACCP, juice HACCP, infant formula, bottled water, dietary supplements, low acid canned foods, and acidified foods. It also includes dairy farms, which is the only farms that are subject to FSMA. And it also includes any food or ingredients of food that you import to the United States from another country. Those are all regulated by this rule. It does not include animal food.
So that sounds like that's really important to remember, is that it does include all FDA regulated food establishments, all large ones, and they're subject to the rule and the FDA inspections. So that kind of brings us to the recent changes. Can you tell us about the evolution over the last year or so, 6 months or so, however long it's been on the rule?
Yeah, great question. So after the rule was published, the agency wanted to go really cautiously before they decided to enforce the rule. And they wanted to see how the industry was adapting to this rule. This is a whole new concept to the FDA, and it's new to the food industry in general. So what they did was they wanted to make sure, number one, that the industry understood what was required of them and to see how they were doing. So if the agency were to come to your facility, say for a juice HACCP inspection or preventive controls inspection or a GMP inspection or a for-cause inspection, they would end that inspection. At the very end, they'd ask you a few questions, take about 15 minutes. And they were called quick check questions. And they would say, do you have a written food defense plan? Have you used a vulnerability assessment? If so, what type did you do? Do you have your corrective actions in place? Have you had an incident? Did you consider the inside attacker? Several series of questions, and they would collect that data. No facility was given any type of infraction due to a quick check. They were just simple questions. At the end of that, as of last, I'd say at the end of October of last year, roughly 1,300 facilities had been inspected over the years using the quick check system. What did they find out? They found out about 200 of those facilities didn't qualify. They were too small, so that was easy. They found out about 70% of the facilities were using the easiest of the 3 vulnerability assessments, the key assessment type, which is very simple to apply. Unfortunately, the agency was kind of surprised by that. They actually thought more facilities would use the 3-element approach. So that was kind of a surprise to them. That takes additional training, and they understand that. And they believe, or they have the assumption, that when it's time to reevaluate your food defense plan, then they'll apply the 3 elements or the hybrid approach for the vulnerability assessment. But we'll wait and see if that truly happens. No 43s were issued during that check. Then, starting in August of last year, they started to enforce the rule. What does that mean? That means they went to a facility to see, have you implemented your written food defense plan and are you documenting it? The enforcement team consists of only 5 individuals called the Food Defense Inspection Team and 1 supervisor currently. These team of experts are extremely well trained. They can go to any food facility regulated by the FDA, be it juice or infant formula, or if you're a bakery or if you're a confectioner, and assess for those rules you must follow, as well as the food defense rule. So what does that mean? That means they can come to your facility and you will get 2 notices of inspection, one for food defense
Okay.
and one for food safety. What that means is they will spend a day or 2 just looking at your food safety plans and your food safety operations on the floor. Then they'll shift gears and spend a day or 2 looking at your food defense plan, looking
Okay.
at how have you implemented your mitigation strategies at each actual process step, and are you verifying them? Are you monitoring them? Are you documenting that? Of those, roughly about 10 have been done as of early November of last year. Recently, I've have been informed that another facility has been inspected for a full food defense inspection,
Mhm.
seeing if the written food defense plans have truly been implemented. What does this mean when they come on site and you can do
Right.
242s? Well, that could mean if you're in violation of a food safety issue, you can get a 483 for that. A 483, for those you don't know, is a written letter from the FDA that says you're not in compliance with the rule, for whatever rule that is that you follow for food safety. You could also get a 483 for inadequate or not or poorly implemented written food defense plan. 483s are public. In
Okay.
order to
Right.
protect our most significantly vulnerable spots because of food defense, the agency has opted to state simply if you're going to get a 483 for food defense, it's just going to say you're not following CFR Part 121.126. That's the rule. That's all it's going to say. No details
Oh,
are going to
wow.
be made
Okay.
public. Nothing. What'll happen is later on, the agency will send a supplement letter directly to the facility with the exact details of why they're out of compliance. That will not be public. The same will hold true for any warning letters that evolve from a 483. If you're not sufficiently documenting and showing to the agency you've improved your deficiencies, the warning letter will simply say you're not following CFR 121.126. That's also public. That's all it's going to be publicized. Then they'll send you a supplement letter saying why you're deficient.
Okay.
The other thing that's different about enforcement of this rule, unlike food safety,
Mhm.
the agency will go out of its way not to collect any documentation. They will go out of their way not to take a photograph. The
Okay.
idea is to keep your food defense plan close to your chest for that site. They don't want the release of your most vulnerable things made public in any way
Right.
whatsoever. Therefore, if the agency is walking through your facility and they're looking at your written food defense plan, if they see a point step procedure that you say, well, it's not an actual process step, and they say it is, or they feel that it is, you're going to have a discussion with them. And they're going
Mm.
to try to come to an agreement. If for any reason the two of you can't come to an agreement, it will be at that point that they will call their supervisor as well as several other subject matter experts in the Washington, D.C. area and go over that point step procedure in detail to either
Okay.
say, yes, we agree it's not an APS, or they're going to say, no, we don't agree. It is an APS. You must do something about it. That's the one reason why they don't want to take any copies of anything. No papers, no photographs, nothing. If for some reason they need something, it'll be extremely limited.
Okay.
And the reason is we don't want to have any of this released to the public, to the bad people out there, to show where your
Right.
weaknesses are.
Okay. So you've covered those inspections really well. There's a lot to it, it seems.
Mhm. Yeah,
So if I'm compliant though, like with GFSI, can I expect to kind of breeze through that FDA IA inspection?
that's a great question. And I see this a lot. And the short answer
Hmm.
is absolutely not. No, you are not.
Okay.
Um, the GFSI, if you follow any of the GFSI food safety, uh, what we call schemes or plans or
Yeah.
programs, um, it fails to meet the intentional adulteration rule under FSMA. It does not consider the inside attacker. It does not
Okay.
consider your most significantly vulnerable point steps procedures. Therefore, if you feel for some reason you're following a GFSI program, you're all set, you're okay. Unfortunately, you're going to be found non-compliant. So you
Okay.
must have a written food defense plan per the intentional adulteration rule. It's mandatory if you're a large facility.
Right. Okay. So, Chris, you are a highly lauded IA vulnerability assessment lead instructor, which is really cool. So, you've conducted a number of training courses and gone on site to assist companies with their IA compliance. So, from all these, what aspects of the rule have you seen to be most challenging for facilities?
I see a couple of general observations that are common. Um, Many companies uh, originally did a vulnerability assessment, and it could have been the CAT method, which is the simplest. It could have been the 3-element, which is more specific, or it could have been a hybrid, which is the combination of the two. And they think they're done. Well, they're not
Okay.
done. That's only the beginning. The only time you're done is if after you do your written vulnerability assessment and you say, I don't have any actual process steps. If so, then you don't need a written food defense plan. You just write a summary. I looked at each point step procedure. They're not in the APS. I'm done. For all the other companies who find at least one or more actual process steps, now they need to have a mitigation strategy. Now they need to implement the management components, food defense monitoring, verification, corrective actions. The other similar thing that I see is a lot of companies will actually do the vulnerability assessment and they'll actually write out what the mitigation strategies will be, and then they stop. They
Okay.
didn't implement any of the management components. The third main thing I see are companies who've used the food defense plan builder that the agency gave the industry to
All right.
use. And the food defense plan builder version 2.0 is completely aligned with the rule. If you're using version
Okay.
1.0, I'm sorry, you have to redo it. It does not align with the rule. Only about 20% of it does. But
Oh,
version
wow.
2 completely aligns with the rule. Unfortunately, what I've seen is companies just assume that they can go online, start filling it out without any training. You still need to
Oh,
be trained in all aspects of the food defense rule to properly fill out version 2.0 plan builder. And what I've seen are this the most absurd scoring systems and rationale that do not follow the rule, and it leads to an unexecutable food defense plan,
oh, wow.
and it just cannot be implemented. And it just sits there and it collects dust, and they think they're done. So
Okay.
that's the third main thing I see. If you're going to use version 2.0, get trained on it, but make sure you implement everything and continue the recording and documentation of the data as required.
So it sounds like one big key point really is training,
Yes.
and TAG can help with that.
Yes. So all aspects of the intentional rule is designed to have an individual type of training. So you can be trained on the key activity type, vulnerability assessment. You can be trained on mitigation strategies, how to write them, implement them. And you can be trained on the 3-element vulnerability assessment, as well as the hybrid vulnerability assessment. And then you could be trained on the management components, food defense monitoring, food defense verification, food defense corrective action, and writing the food defense plan as a whole. And TAG is very well equipped to train anybody who wants to take any of those portions of that role.
Okay. So I just want to thank you a lot here, Chris. We've covered a lot of different areas of the intentional adulteration itself, inspection, training, and just general rule compliance. But is there anything else that you see as important that we've not covered, or just something that you really want to highlight for our listeners as a takeaway to particularly remember from this?
Yeah, great question. Just a couple little points. It's not too late. If you don't have a written food defense plan per FSMA, per the intentional adulteration rule, please do so. Okay. The food defense quick checks are still occurring. And if you're fortunate, or some people say unfortunate, you can still get a visit from the FDA to look at your written food defense plan and make sure it's implemented. Those inspections, that enforcement rule is ongoing. Ask your suppliers, have you
Mm.
a written food defense plan per the FSMA intentional adulteration rule. Too many
Okay.
companies don't do that as part of their supplier approval program. Make sure that's a question that can be answered. If you get asked to provide your food defense plan to somebody who wants to approve you as a supplier,
Oh,
do not give them a copy of your food defense plan. You can write a statement that says, yes, I am following the intentional adulteration rule. If you want to come look at it, you can come to my facility in person, but you cannot have a copy of it. That food defense plan is not intended to be shared publicly.
okay.
Don't be afraid to ask an expert. If you want somebody to review your plan for adequacy, make sure it's implemented properly. If you have trouble determining if something truly is an actual process step or not, have an expert come on site in person and review it to help you out.
Okay. Thank you again. Excuse me. Thank you again, Chris. And I want to thank our listeners for listening in as well. To stay informed on all things food safety and ensure that you don't miss any episodes of Tag Talks, be sure to like, follow, or subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or whatever is your favorite podcast platform. Thank you.
Thank you.